As the victim's mother wept on the stand, Riley Jones let out a sharp, dismissive laugh, a sound that sealed her fate in the minds of the jury. She genuinely believed that murdering her husband was a necessary step toward the new life she deserved, a future unburdened by the man who adored her. But the final piece of evidence that would guarantee her downfall came not from a detective or a forensics expert, but from a secret recording made by the very person she killed to be with. In the manicured suburbs of Northwood, the Jones house was a portrait of domestic success, a two-story beacon of upper-middle-class aspiration on a street lined with identical dreams. Charles and Riley Jones were, by all outward appearances, the couple that others measured themselves against, their lives a curated collection of happy anniversaries, tropical vacations, and smiling holiday photographs. To their neighbors, they were the embodiment of stability and affection, a partnership built on a foundation of shared goals and mutual respect. Yet beneath this polished veneer, a rot of breathtaking selfishness had taken hold. It was a malignancy that festered in secret, hidden behind the very smiles that reassured the world of their contentment, a deception so complete that not even Charles, the man who shared her bed, could sense the abyss opening beneath him. Charles Jones was a man of simple decencies and profound kindness, an architect whose love for clean lines and stable structures mirrored his own personality. He believed in promises, in the sanctity of the vows he had taken 10 years prior, and he saw his wife, Riley, not just as a partner but as the central pillar of his existence. He was the kind of husband who remembered the small things, the name of her favorite author, the exact shade of blue she loved, the way she took her coffee on rainy mornings. It was this gentle, unwavering devotion that made Riley's betrayal not merely a crime of violence, but an act of profound psychological cruelty, a complete negation of a decade of shared life, and a testament to a heart utterly devoid of reciprocal warmth. The day of the murder was their 10th wedding anniversary, a day Charles had planned with meticulous care and boundless enthusiasm. He had filled the house with lilies, her favorite flower, and had spent the afternoon preparing a meal he knew she adored, each ingredient chosen to commemorate a memory from their life together. He was a man steeped in the joyful anticipation of celebrating a decade of love, completely unaware that the woman he was celebrating with saw the occasion not as a milestone, but as a final, tedious obligation before the beginning of her real life. For Riley, the anniversary was a closing chapter, a performance of affection that masked a cold and resolute plan to achieve a future that had no place for him in it. The crime itself was an act of devastating intimacy, a violation of the ultimate sanctuary. Riley waited until Charles was at his most vulnerable, his heart full of love and his guard completely down, a testament to her calculated and patient cruelty. She had poisoned his celebratory glass of wine, a rare vintage he had been saving for this very moment, and watched as the man who had given her everything began to fade before her very eyes. There was no struggle, no last-minute plea, just the quiet, bewildered dimming of a life extinguished by the one person he believed would protect it above all others. Her actions were not those of passion or rage, they were the methodical, unfeeling steps of a person discarding an inconvenience, a final, brutal transaction to clear the path for something new. The silence that followed in the once happy home was absolute, a chilling testament to the void she had created in pursuit of her own selfish desires. The idyllic image of the Jones household had been shattered, replaced by a crime scene of unimaginable betrayal where love and murder had occupied the very same space. The lilies he had bought her drooped in their vases, their sweet scent now mingling with the metallic tang of a future stolen, their white petals a stark, silent witness to the darkness that had unfolded. The carefully prepared dinner grew cold on the counter, an uneaten monument to a celebration that would never be, its flavors and aromas forever trapped in the moment before the ultimate act of treachery. It was a crime not just against a man, but against the very idea of trust, a brutal lesson in the terrifying capacity of a human heart to feign love while plotting its absolute destruction. The house on the quiet suburban street was no longer a home, it had become a tomb, a carefully decorated stage for a tragedy conceived in the cold calculus of a sociopathic mind. She had erased him from their shared life with the same dispassion she might use to delete an old file from a computer, a final chilling click to clear space for her new beginning. The meticulous nature of the crime scene initially suggested a professional, an intruder who knew how to cover their tracks and leave minimal evidence. But to the trained eye of the first responding officers, something felt profoundly wrong, a staged quality that hinted at a performance rather than a random act of violence. The broken window in the back seemed too precise, the disarray in the living room too theatrical, as if someone had followed a script for a home invasion rather than actually committing one. Every detail was a lie, a carefully placed prop in a drama of Riley's own making, designed to cast her as the grieving victim rather than the cold-blooded architect of the entire event. Her narrative was a fortress of falsehoods, built to withstand the initial shock and inquiry, but it was a structure with a flawed foundation, destined to crumble under the weight of sustained scrutiny. The precision of her deception was in itself a clue pointing not to an external threat but to an internal one of unimaginable cruelty, a monster who had been living inside the walls all along. The quiet street, the perfect house, the tragic story, it was all part of a grand illusion, and the investigation was only just beginning to pull at the threads that would unravel it all. The initial perception of a random tragedy would soon give way to the horrifying reality of a calculated execution, a plan that had been set in motion long before that fateful anniversary evening. The truth was not to be found in the manufactured chaos of the living room, but in the chilling stillness of Riley Jones's eyes, a place where remorse had never taken root. The quiet neighborhood was about to learn a terrible lesson about the secrets that can be kept behind closed doors and smiling faces. When the first patrol car arrived, its flashing lights painting the serene suburban street in strokes of red and blue, Riley Jones was already performing her role with an unnerving commitment. She was the picture of a distraught wife, her voice choked with manufactured sobs as she recounted a fabricated story of a violent break-in to the 911 operator. Her story was a tapestry of clichés woven from countless crime dramas, a shadowy figure, a struggle in the dark, and her own miraculous escape as her brave husband confronted the intruder. It was a narrative designed to elicit sympathy and deflect suspicion, a performance so polished it felt rehearsed, yet this very perfection was what first pricked the interest of the seasoned professionals who arrived on the scene. Detective Stephen Nash, a man who had spent 20 years peeling back the layers of human deception, listened to Riley's account with a practiced patience, his gaze analytical and his mind a catalog of inconsistencies. He noted the absence of defensive wounds on her hands, the perfect state of her clothing, and the dry, theatrical quality of her tears, small details that contradicted the violent struggle she described. She spoke in complete, well-formed sentences, her timeline precise and her emotional display timed for maximum effect, a stark contrast to the fragmented, chaotic recollections of genuine trauma victims. It was this cool, calculated delivery that transformed Detective Nash's professional skepticism into a deep and unsettling certainty that he was not speaking to a victim, but to a killer. In the sterile environment of the interrogation room, under the flat, unforgiving light, Riley's carefully constructed facade began to show its cracks. She repeated her story with the same unwavering precision, a script she had clearly memorized, but when Detective Nash began to press on the small logistical details, her composure wavered. He questioned the timeline, the nature of the alleged struggle, and the convenient fact that nothing of value had been taken, and with each probing question, a flicker of irritation would cross her face. This was not the confusion of a grieving widow struggling with a traumatic memory. It was the arrogance of a pathological liar, incensed that her audience was not accepting her story at face value. The core of her deception was a profound contempt for the intelligence of her interrogators, a belief that her story was so compelling, her performance so convincing, that they would be fools not to believe it. She underestimated their experience, their ability to discern truth from fiction, and this arrogance became her undoing, leading her to construct a web of lies that was as elaborate as it was fragile. She claimed the intruder had worn gloves, yet her husband's body showed no signs of being moved by a stranger. She claimed a violent struggle had ensued, yet the room was almost pristine save for the few artfully overturned pieces of furniture. Each lie was a thread, and with every question, Detective Nash pulled another one loose, slowly unraveling the entire fabrication before her very eyes. Her story was not just a lie, it was an insult, a poorly researched piece of fiction presented as fact to men and women who dealt in the grim reality of murder every single day. She had assumed they were an easy audience, but she had walked onto a stage where every word was scrutinized and every gesture analyzed, and her performance was failing spectacularly. She believed she was smarter than everyone in the room, a fatal miscalculation for a killer who had prioritized performance over plausibility. The more she spoke, the more she entangled herself in her own narrative, each new detail a knot in the rope that was tightening around her. She was not just a murderer, she was a bad writer, and her poorly constructed plot was falling apart under the first critical review. Her attempts to feign grief were particularly telling, marked by an almost comical theatricality that did more to condemn her than any piece of evidence could. She would press her palms to her eyes, her body shaking with what was meant to be uncontrollable sorrow, yet no tears would fall, a physiological truth her body refused to fake. She would speak of her love for Charles in grandiose, sweeping terms, using the language of a eulogy rather than the raw, broken words of a person who has just lost their world. It was a hollow echo of genuine emotion, a caricature of grief that was deeply unsettling to the detectives who had seen the real thing countless times. The interrogation stretched for hours, a slow and deliberate dismantling of her fictional world. Detective Nash and his team presented her with the first wave of contradictions: the lack of forced entry on the supposedly broken window, the undisturbed dust on the sills, the neighbors who had heard no struggle, no scream, only the quiet hum of a suburban evening. With each piece of contradictory information, her frustration grew, her mask of sorrow slipping to reveal the cold fury beneath. She began to lash out, accusing them of insensitivity, of harassing a grieving widow, a desperate pivot from victim to martyr. But it was too late. Her initial performance had already defined her in their minds. The lies were too numerous, too obvious, and her indignation was not that of an innocent person being wrongly accused, but of a guilty person whose carefully laid plans were being systematically exposed. The interrogation was no longer about extracting a confession, it was about giving her enough room to bury herself completely under the weight of her own impossible falsehoods. The truth was closing in, an inevitable tide against which her paper-thin dam of lies could not possibly hold. The quiet confidence she had entered the room with had evaporated, replaced by the panicked energy of a cornered animal, and she had no one to blame but herself. As Riley Jones sat in a holding cell, her narrative of a tragic home invasion having collapsed under the slightest pressure, Detective Stephen Nash and his team began the methodical work of excavating the truth of her life. They operated on the principle that murder is rarely a story's beginning, but rather its brutal and predictable conclusion, the final act in a long play of deception and discontent. The first place they looked for the story's origins was not in the crime scene itself, but in the sterile, unforgiving world of financial records, a place where numbers tell tales of desperation and secret lives with an honesty that people rarely muster. What they found was not just a motive, but a portrait of a woman whose greed was as deep and as cold as her capacity for violence. The image of Riley as a successful, happy suburban wife was the first casualty of the investigation, a casualty of bank statements and credit card bills. For years, she had been a financial parasite, secretly bleeding the couple's finances dry to fund a life Charles knew nothing about, a life of luxury, impulsive purchases, and, most significantly, another person. Investigators uncovered a series of secret credit cards taken out in her name but with statements sent to a private post office box, each one maxed out with charges for designer clothes, expensive spa days, and lavish weekend trips. This was the life she felt she was entitled to, a life of careless indulgence built on a foundation of lies and financed by the man she would eventually murder to escape the consequences of her own avarice. The financial bleed was not just reckless, it was systematic, a calculated draining of every shared asset. Detectives found that Riley had been forging Charles's signature on loan applications, taking out second and third mortgages on their home, and systematically emptying their joint savings and investment accounts. She had constructed an elaborate shell game, moving money from one account to another, a dizzying dance of digits designed to conceal the ever-growing black hole at the center of their finances. Charles, a man who trusted his wife implicitly with their financial affairs, had been living in a blissful ignorance, believing their future was secure while Riley was selling it off piece by piece to fund her present fantasies. The debt she had amassed was staggering, a crushing weight that was just weeks away from collapsing the entire charade. This financial ruin was inextricably linked to the other half of her secret life, a passionate affair with a woman named Chloe Palmer, a personal trainer she had met at an upscale gym. The investigation revealed that the bulk of Riley's secret spending was directed towards this new relationship, a whirlwind of expensive gifts, secret vacations, and the down payment on a chic downtown apartment she was planning to move into. Her desire for a fresh start was not just an emotional one, it was a desperate attempt to outrun the financial catastrophe she had single-handedly created. By killing Charles, she believed she could not only free herself for a new relationship, but also cash in on his substantial life insurance policy, a multi-million-dollar payout that she saw as the ultimate reset button, a way to wipe the slate clean and start her fantasy life, debt-free and with the woman she truly wanted. It was a motive of chilling pragmatism, a business decision where her husband's life was simply the final asset to be liquidated. The murder was not an act of passion for her new lover, it was a calculated financial transaction, the brutal culmination of years of parasitic greed. The betrayal was absolute, a chilling revelation that for Riley, Charles was not a person to be loved, but a resource to be exploited and ultimately discarded when he was no longer useful. His life had a price tag, and she had decided it was time to cash it in. The discovery of this hidden financial world transformed the case, providing a clear and undeniable motive that was as cold as it was compelling. The romantic narrative of a woman escaping a loveless marriage was obliterated, replaced by the sordid reality of a con artist looking for her next score. The investigators now understood that they were not just dealing with a murderer, but with a predator who had been hunting within her own home for years, her patient, loving husband the unsuspecting prey. The sheer scale of her financial deception was breathtaking, a testament to her profound selfishness and her absolute conviction that her desires superseded all else, including her husband's right to live. This financial evidence provided the prosecution with a powerful and easily understood narrative for the jury. It painted a picture of a woman backed into a corner, not by circumstance, but by her own insatiable greed and recklessness. The impending financial collapse was the ticking clock that had forced her hand, transforming a long-held fantasy of escape into a concrete and murderous plan. Every forged signature, every secret withdrawal, every hidden credit card bill was a step on the path to that fatal anniversary night. The investigators had not just uncovered a motive, they had unearthed the entire twisted blueprint for a murder that had been years in the making. The contrast between the public facade of the Jones life and the private reality of Riley's parasitic behavior was stark and damning. To the world, they were a team, building a life together, but in reality, Riley had been operating as a saboteur, systematically dismantling their shared future for her own selfish ends. Charles had been her partner in life, but she had treated him as a mark, a source of endless funding for a life he wasn't even aware she was living. This deep-seated betrayal, rooted in years of financial deception, was in many ways as cruel as the final act of murder itself. It revealed a character devoid of empathy, a woman who saw other people, even the man she had vowed to love and cherish, as mere instruments for her own gratification. In the months leading up to the trial, the legal machinery ground forward with its deliberate, methodical pace, a series of pre-trial hearings and motions that serve as the prelude to the main judicial event. It is during this period that the battle lines are drawn, evidence is debated, and the strategies of both the prosecution and the defense begin to take shape. For Riley Jones, these procedural hearings were not a somber reckoning with the consequences of her actions, but another stage on which to perform, another opportunity to project an image of wronged innocence. But it was here, in the supposed sanctity of the courtroom, that the first public cracks in her carefully constructed mask of sanity would appear. Her defense attorney, Laura Bennett, a seasoned public defender with a reputation for professionalism and tenacity, had advised Riley to maintain a low profile, to present a demeanor of quiet grief and solemn respect for the process. It was a standard, effective strategy designed to make her a sympathetic, or at least a neutral figure in the eyes of the court and the eventual jury. Riley, however, saw herself as the star of the proceedings, and she had no intention of fading into the background, her narcissistic personality making it impossible for her to follow the sound advice of the very person trying to save her life. The defining moment of this pre-trial period, the one that would be endlessly replayed on news segments and dissected by legal analysts, came during a tedious hearing on the admissibility of forensic evidence. As the prosecutor, Matthew Hughes, and Laura Bennett argued complex legal points before the judge, Riley sat at the defense table, seemingly lost in her own world, a picture of bored detachment. Next to her, in the front row of the gallery, sat Eleanor Jones, Charles's mother, a woman whose quiet dignity and profound grief had become a silent, powerful presence in the courtroom, her face a roadmap of a parent's worst imaginable pain. It was during a moment of particularly emotional testimony from an expert describing the poison used to kill Charles that Eleanor Jones finally broke, a single, heartbroken sob escaping her lips, a sound of pure, unadulterated anguish that briefly silenced the room. Most people, even the most hardened criminals, would have the basic human decency to avert their gaze, to grant a grieving mother a moment of privacy in her public agony. Riley Jones, however, leaned towards her lawyer, a small, cruel smirk playing on her lips, and whispered a comment, her voice just loud enough to be picked up by the sensitive courtroom hot mic intended to record the official proceedings for the court record. The words she spoke were not just callous, they were sadistic, a moment of pure, unadulterated evil made public. "Listen to the old cow blubber," the microphone captured her saying, the words echoing with chilling clarity in the sound engineer's headphones. "You'd think I'd killed her golden goose. Oh, wait." The whisper was followed by a soft, stifled snicker, a sound of pure, venomous amusement, a joke shared between a monster and her horrified legal counsel. The sound technician, stunned by what he had just heard, immediately flagged the recording, understanding the monumental significance of the moment he had just captured. The mask had not just slipped, Riley had ripped it off herself, revealing the gleeful, remorseless creature that lay beneath. It was an act of such staggering arrogance and cruelty that it defied comprehension, a glimpse into a soul utterly devoid of empathy or compassion. The hot mic had captured the real Riley Jones, not the grieving widow or the wrongly accused woman, but a sadist who derived pleasure from the pain of others, even the elderly mother of the man she had murdered in cold blood. This single whispered sentence would do more to condemn her in the court of public opinion than any piece of forensic evidence. The recording was a direct transmission from the heart of a sociopath, and it was a message the world was about to hear loud and clear. It was the moment her defense became not just difficult, but utterly impossible. Laura Bennett's face, captured by the courtroom cameras, was a mask of sheer horror, the look of a lawyer who knew she was no longer defending a client, but chaperoning a monster through the legal system. Riley, oblivious and arrogant, had just handed the prosecution the weapon that would destroy her. The first day of the trial of Riley Jones was an event of intense media speculation and public interest, the courtroom packed with journalists, legal observers, and community members drawn to the grim theater of justice. The air was thick with anticipation as Riley was led to the defense table, her expression a practiced mask of somber gravity, a stark contrast to the smug whisper that had been leaked to the press weeks earlier. She was playing the part of the accused, but the city already saw her as the villain, and the trial was seen less as a search for truth and more as a formal confirmation of what everyone already believed to be true. The prosecution, led by the methodical and sharp-witted Matthew Hughes, understood the power of narrative, the importance of framing the story in a way that would resonate with the jury on a deep, emotional level. He knew he had a mountain of forensic evidence, a clear financial motive, and the defendant's own damning words on tape, but he chose not to begin with the cold, hard facts of the case. He chose instead to begin with the victim, to resurrect Charles Jones in the minds of the 12 strangers who would decide his wife's fate, to make them understand the scale of the human loss before they ever heard a single detail about the crime itself. As Judge Victoria Edwards called the court to order and Matthew Hughes approached the podium to deliver his opening statement, a large screen descended from the ceiling next to the jury box. There was no sound at first, just a simple title card that read, "A Decade with Charles." Then the screen flickered to life, not with crime scene photos or legal documents, but with a montage of videos taken from Charles's own phone, a collection of moments that represented the life Riley had stolen. The courtroom watched in silence as a younger, smiling Charles raised a glass at his own wedding, his eyes filled with an adoration for his new bride that was now almost painful to witness. The video montage continued, a silent, poignant journey through a life lived with joy and love. There was Charles on his 30th birthday, blowing out candles on a cake presented by Riley, his face a picture of pure, uncomplicated happiness. There he was on a beach in Hawaii, laughing as a wave crashed over him, a moment of spontaneous joy captured for posterity. And then came the most powerful clip of all, a video Charles had recorded himself, a message intended for Riley on their 10th anniversary, the very day he was killed. His face filled the screen, his expression earnest, and his voice thick with emotion as he spoke of his love for her, of his gratitude for the life they had built, and of his excitement for the decades still to come. The video ended with him smiling, looking directly into the camera as if he were looking into her eyes and saying, "Happy anniversary, Ry. I love you more than words can say. Here's to the next 50. The screen went black, and a profound, heavy silence filled the courtroom, a silence thick with the ghost of the man they had just come to know. Every juror was visibly moved, their faces a mixture of sadness and a dawning understanding of the true nature of the crime. Matthew Hughes had not just introduced them to the victim, he had made them feel his absence, the terrible void left behind by his murder. He had allowed Charles Jones to testify in his own trial, his own words, a powerful, heartbreaking testament to the love and trust his wife had so brutally betrayed. It was a masterful opening, a strategic decision to humanize the proceedings and to frame the case not as a legal puzzle to be solved, but as a profound human tragedy to be avenged. By the time Hughes began to speak, to lay out the cold facts of the poison, the financial motive, and the secret life, the jury was not just listening to the details of a murder, they were hearing the story of how the vibrant, loving man from the video had been cruelly and systematically erased from the world. Riley Jones, sitting at the defense table, had remained impassive throughout the video, her face a blank canvas, an island of cold indifference in a sea of shared human emotion. Her lack of reaction was, in itself, a confession, a silent confirmation of the monster Charles had been speaking to in his final, loving message. The trial had just begun, but in many ways the emotional verdict had already been rendered. Following the powerful emotional impact of the opening statement, Matthew Hughes and his team began the methodical process of constructing their case against Riley Jones, brick by evidentiary brick. They moved from the realm of the heart to the cold, hard world of digital forensics, a domain where every click, every search, and every keystroke leaves an indelible trace, a permanent record of a person's thoughts and intentions. It was here, in the ones and zeros retrieved from Riley's laptop and phone, that the prosecution found its most damning evidence, a digital diary that chronicled not a life of love, but a meticulously planned journey toward murder. The star witness for this phase of the trial was a forensic data analyst, a woman who spoke in calm, precise terms as she walked the jury through the digital ghost of Riley Jones's mind. The prosecution displayed the contents of the laptop's hard drive on the large courtroom screen, transforming the abstract concept of search history into a terrifying and undeniable roadmap of premeditation. The jury saw a list of search queries entered in the weeks and months leading up to Charles's death that painted a chilling picture of a killer doing her homework with the dispassionate focus of a student researching a term paper. The search terms were a lexicon of murder. The jury read queries like, most common poisons that mimic heart attack, how to buy potassium cyanide without a license, and average life insurance payout for accidental death. Each search was a window into her cold and calculating mind, a demonstration that Charles's death was not a spontaneous act, but a well-researched project. The analyst testified that these searches were often conducted late at night, in the quiet hours of the home she shared with her husband, a deeply unsettling image of Riley sitting in the dark, bathed in the glow of her screen, plotting the end of the man likely sleeping in the next room. The digital trail was not limited to just the acquisition of a murder weapon. It also revealed the depth of her planning for the aftermath. The jury was shown searches for how to defeat a lie detector test, best way to fake grief in countries with no extradition treaty with the United States. This evidence was crucial, as it obliterated any potential defense argument of temporary insanity or a crime of passion. It proved, beyond any reasonable doubt, that Riley had considered not only the murder itself but the subsequent investigation and had actively researched ways to deceive law enforcement and escape justice. Her actions were not those of a person who had lost control, they were the actions of a methodical planner, a cold-blooded killer who saw murder as a logistical problem to be solved. The search history was her to-do list, a step-by-step guide to becoming a wealthy widow. The data analyst also presented evidence of deleted files and scrubbed hard drives, a clear indication of Riley's attempts to cover her tracks. She explained to the jury how digital forensics experts were able to recover these ghost files, revealing Riley's research into Charles's life insurance policy, her secret correspondence with Chloe Palmer, and draft after draft of text messages she had composed to feign shock and horror after the discovery of the body. She had tried to erase her digital footprints, but in the world of modern forensics, true erasure is nearly impossible. Every deleted file was a testament to her consciousness of guilt, another nail in her legal coffin. The cumulative effect of this digital evidence was devastating. It stripped away Riley's mask of the grieving widow and revealed her as a patient, meticulous predator. The jury was no longer just looking at a woman accused of a crime, they were staring at the unvarnished proof of her intent, a direct feed from her own mind that showed a complete and utter preoccupation with the mechanics of murder and deception. The cool, detached language of the search queries, devoid of any emotion or hesitation, was perhaps the most chilling aspect of all. It was the language of a sociopath who saw her husband not as a person, but as an obstacle, and his murder as a simple, practical solution to her self-inflicted problems. The silent digital record spoke with a volume and clarity that no human witness ever could, providing an irrefutable chronicle of a murder in the making. Matthew Hughes had effectively turned Riley's own laptop into the prosecution's most powerful witness, and it was a witness that could not be cross-examined, intimidated, or discredited. It simply presented the cold, hard truth. Every defendant in the American legal system is afforded the right to present a defense, a cornerstone of jurisprudence that ensures a fair trial. In the case of Riley Jones, her defense attorney Laura Bennett faced a seemingly insurmountable task, confronted with a mountain of forensic evidence, a clear financial motive, and a client whose own words and actions had already condemned her in the court of public opinion. Bennett's strategy was a desperate one to portray Riley as a misunderstood and emotionally battered woman, a victim in her own right, hoping to sow just enough doubt to hang the jury. But this fragile strategy was entirely dependent on Riley herself remaining a silent, enigmatic figure at the defense table. It was a strategy that Riley, in her boundless arrogance, was destined to destroy. Against the frantic and strenuous objections of her own counsel, Riley Jones insisted on taking the stand in her own defense, a decision born of a narcissistic conviction that she was smarter than the prosecutor, more charming than the evidence, and capable of convincing the jury of her innocence through the sheer force of her personality. It was a catastrophic miscalculation, a moment of hubris so profound that it would be remembered as one of the most spectacular acts of legal self-immolation in the state's history. As she walked to the witness stand, Riley exuded an air of confidence, a calm and collected demeanor that she believed would read as innocence. She answered her own lawyer's gentle questions with poise and conviction, painting a picture of a troubled marriage and a husband she claimed was secretly controlling and emotionally distant, a desperate last-ditch attempt to slander the man she had murdered. For a brief moment, a flicker of her old, convincing charm was on display, but this illusion was shattered the moment prosecutor Matthew Hughes rose for his cross-examination, his expression that of a patient predator who had been waiting for this very moment. Hughes began his cross-examination not with an attack but with a series of simple, seemingly innocuous questions, lulling Riley into a false sense of security. He asked her about her lifestyle, her spending habits, and her relationship with Chloe Palmer, and she answered with a series of well-rehearsed and plausible-sounding lies, her confidence growing with each answer. Then, Hughes calmly produced the bank statements, the forged loan applications, and the secret credit card bills, laying them out one by one on the evidence projector for the entire courtroom to see. He asked her to explain each one, and as the undeniable proof of her financial parasitism filled the screen, her composure began to crack, her answers becoming defensive and evasive. Her mask of the wronged wife was crumbling under the weight of her own greed. The turning point of the testimony, the moment her entire defense imploded, came when Hughes shifted his focus to her digital life. He displayed her sickening search history on the screen, the cold, black and white text a stark testament to her murderous intent. "Mrs. Jones," Hughes asked, his voice calm and steady, "on the 3rd of May, just 2 weeks before your husband's death, you searched for the phrase 'how to buy potassium cyanide without a license.' Can you explain to the jury why you were researching that particular chemical?" Riley, cornered and exposed, stammered, claiming it was for a novel she was thinking of writing, a lie so transparently absurd that a ripple of incredulous laughter went through the courtroom gallery. Hughes pressed on, his questions becoming sharper, more precise, dismantling her lies with surgical precision. He confronted her with her searches on faking grief, on defeating polygraphs, and on non-extradition countries, and with each question, her facade of calm sophistication dissolved, replaced by a raw, snarling anger. She began to lash out, insulting Hughes, accusing him of twisting her words, and sneering at the jury, her true, venomous personality finally breaking through the surface for all to see. The jury, who had been watching with rapt attention, now saw not a grieving widow or a misunderstood victim, but an arrogant, deceitful, and profoundly unpleasant woman. Her attempt to charm them had backfired spectacularly, revealing a contempt for them and for the truth that was palpable. Her decision to testify had been a gift to the prosecution, a live demonstration of the very character traits, the narcissism, the pathological lying, the utter lack of remorse that had allowed her to murder her husband in the first place. By the time she stepped down from the stand, her credibility was not just damaged, it was utterly annihilated. Laura Bennett sat at the defense table, her head in her hands, the posture of a lawyer who knew her case was not just lost, but had been gleefully set on fire by her own client. Riley had taken the stand to save herself, but instead, she had performed her own execution, her staggering arrogance serving as the final, irrefutable piece of evidence against her. With the evidence presented and the testimonies concluded, the trial moved into its final, most human phase, the victim impact statements. This is the moment in the judicial process where the focus shifts from the perpetrator to the profound and irreparable damage they have caused. A chance for the loved ones of the victim to give voice to their grief and to address the court and the killer directly. It is often the most emotionally charged part of a trial, a raw and unfiltered expression of loss, and in the case of Riley Jones, it would provide the stage for her most shocking and unforgivable act of courtroom contempt. The prosecution called only one person to speak, Eleanor Jones, Charles's elderly mother. She walked to the podium with a slow, fragile grace, a woman diminished by grief, but fortified by a mother's love. The courtroom was utterly silent as she adjusted the microphone, her hands trembling slightly as she unfolded a piece of paper, her face a portrait of a sorrow so deep it seemed almost unbearable. She did not speak of hatred or revenge. She spoke only of her son, her voice soft but clear, each word filled with a lifetime of love and memory. She told the court about Charles as a little boy, his boundless curiosity and his innate kindness, about his dreams of becoming an architect, and about the immense pride she felt when he had achieved that dream. She spoke of the man he became, a good and decent person who loved his wife with an unwavering devotion that she now understood had been his fatal flaw. As she spoke, tears streamed down her face, but her voice never faltered, a testament to her immense strength in the face of unimaginable pain. The jurors were visibly moved, their professional detachment giving way to simple human empathy, some dabbing at their eyes with tissues. Then Eleanor Jones turned her gaze from the judge and looked directly at the defense table, at the woman who had stolen her only child. "I don't understand," she said, her voice breaking with a sob she could no longer contain. "He loved you. He loved you so much. He gave you everything. All he ever wanted was to make you happy. I just have one question for you, Riley. Why? Why did you do this to my boy?" It was a question that hung in the air, a plea for a reason, for some sliver of sense in a senseless act of cruelty, the cry of a mother's broken heart. It was in this moment of profound and sacred grief that Riley Jones committed an act of such monstrous cruelty that it shocked the entire courtroom into a stunned, horrified silence. As Eleanor wept at the podium, a sound of pure, unadulterated pain, Riley, who had been watching with a look of bored detachment, let out a short, sharp, and unmistakably audible laugh. It was not a nervous tick or a misplaced sound. It was a laugh of pure contempt, a clear and deliberate expression of amusement at the old woman's suffering. The sound, so alien in the somber atmosphere of the court, was like a physical blow, a final sadistic twist of the knife in a wound that would never heal. A collective gasp swept through the gallery. The jurors stared at Riley, their faces masks of shock and revulsion. Matthew Hughes, the prosecutor, froze mid-motion, his expression one of pure, unadulterated fury. Even Riley's own lawyer, Laura Bennett, recoiled from her as if she had been burned. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was Eleanor Jones's weeping, now joined by the shocked sobs of others in the gallery. Then the silence was shattered by the sharp crack of Judge Victoria Edwards's gavel, her face a thunderous mask of judicial rage. "Order!" she boomed, her voice shaking with controlled anger. "The defendant will maintain her composure, or she will be removed from this courtroom." But the damage was done. The laugh had revealed everything. It was a confession more potent than any document, more damning than any testimony. It was the sound of pure, unbridled evil, a glimpse into a soul so barren of empathy that it could find humor in a mother's ultimate agony. In that single horrifying moment, Riley Jones had not just sealed her own fate, she had defined her legacy, ensuring she would be remembered not just as a murderer, but as a monster who laughed at the broken heart of her victim's mother. The breaking point had been reached, and it was not the grief of a mother that had broken, but the last paper-thin vestige of Riley's humanity. The trial of Riley Jones seemed to have reached its inevitable conclusion. The prosecution had presented an airtight case built on financial records, digital forensics, and Riley's own catastrophic testimony and courtroom behavior. The jury's guilty verdict felt like a foregone conclusion, a mere formality before the final sentencing. But Matthew Hughes had one last card to play, a final, devastating revelation that would not only solidify the case beyond all shadow of a doubt, but would also expose a layer of Riley's depravity that was even darker than anyone had imagined. For his final rebuttal witness, Hughes called a name that no one in the courtroom, least of all Riley, expected to hear: Chloe Palmer. The young woman for whom Riley had murdered her husband walked to the stand, her face pale and her expression a mixture of fear and resolve. Riley stared at her former lover with a look of pure, venomous shock, the first genuine emotion she had displayed throughout the entire trial. She had believed Chloe was on her side, a willing partner in their planned future, but she had once again underestimated the conscience of another human being. Chloe testified that in the days following Riley's arrest, she had been consumed by a growing sense of dread and suspicion. Riley's reassurances from jail had begun to sound hollow, her stories inconsistent, and a terrible fear had taken root in Chloe's mind. Acting on a gut instinct, she had gone through the recordings on her own phone, searching for something she couldn't name, and had found a voice memo that Riley had accidentally recorded and sent to her during a pocket dial incident a week after the murder. The recording had been made while Riley was alone in her car, believing she was simply talking to herself, a private monologue of triumph and anticipation. Matthew Hughes asked the court clerk to play the recording. The courtroom fell into a dead silence, broken only by the sound of Riley's voice, clear and chillingly casual, filling the speakers. "God, it's almost perfect," her recorded voice began, a note of smug satisfaction in her tone. "Just a few more weeks of playing the sad little widow, and then it's hello freedom, hello millions." Charlie's mother was a mess today, absolutely fell apart at the lawyer's office. It was almost fun to watch. She has no idea how easy it was. A little something in his favorite wine, and poof, problem solved. He didn't even fight. Just looked at me like a confused puppy. The recording continued, each word a new layer of horror. The jury heard Riley bragging about how she had fooled the police, mocking her dead husband's trusting nature, and callously referring to his life insurance policy as her severance package. But the most sickening part was yet to come. Her voice took on a dreamy, excited tone as she began to plan her future with Chloe, a future built on the foundation of her husband's murder. "Chloe has no idea what I did for us," the recording continued, a chilling note of possessive pride in her voice. "She'll never have to worry about money again. We can go anywhere, do anything. And if she ever gets boring, well, I guess I'm getting pretty good at making people disappear." The recording ended with a soft, self-satisfied chuckle, a sound that echoed the hideous laugh the jury had heard in the courtroom just days before. The impact of the recording was absolute and devastating. It was the final, undeniable proof, straight from the killer's own mouth, a full confession delivered with gleeful, sociopathic pride. It confirmed not only that she had committed the murder, but that she had enjoyed it, that she savored the memory of her husband's final moments, and that she felt a sense of profound power and accomplishment. The final, chilling sentence, hinting at a future where Chloe too could be disposed of if she became an inconvenience, revealed the true, terrifying nature of Riley Jones, a predator who saw all other people not as partners but as disposable objects, useful only until their expiration date. The secret recording was the final nail in her coffin, a coffin she had built herself and then bragged about in the privacy of her own car. Chloe Palmer's testimony was not just the final piece of the puzzle, it was a warning, a message from beyond the grave, delivered by a woman who had finally realized she was not in love with a person, but with a monster. The jury now had everything they needed, their path to a unanimous verdict cleared of any possible doubt. Riley Jones sat stunned into silence, her face a mask of disbelief and fury, finally and irrevocably silenced by the sound of her own voice. The day of sentencing arrived, a gray and somber morning that mirrored the mood inside the courthouse. The jury had returned a guilty verdict on all counts in less than an hour, a swift and decisive judgment that surprised no one. All that remained was for Judge Victoria Edwards to impose her sentence, the final word in the tragic story of Charles Jones and the monstrous actions of his wife Riley. Riley was led into the courtroom in a prison jumpsuit, the last vestiges of her polished facade stripped away, revealing a woman who looked smaller, harder, and consumed by a sullen, impotent rage. Before passing sentence, Judge Edwards, a jurist known for her stoicism and strict adherence to judicial temperament, did something highly unusual. She removed her reading glasses, leaned forward over the bench, and fixed her gaze directly on Riley Jones, her expression one of cold, controlled fury. The courtroom held its breath, sensing this was not going to be a standard recitation of legal statutes and sentencing guidelines. It was going to be a reckoning. For the past several weeks, the judge began, her voice low but carrying to every corner of the silent room, "This court has been your stage. You have performed the role of a grieving widow, a wrongly accused victim, and a misunderstood woman. But your performance, Mrs. Jones, has been as hollow and as soulless as the heart that beats in your chest." She paused, letting the words hang in the air, a blistering indictment that set the tone for what was to come. "You are a master of deception, a pathological liar of a caliber I have rarely seen. But the one person you failed to deceive was yourself. In the quiet moments you knew exactly what you were, a parasite who leached onto a good and decent man, drained him of his resources, and then, when he was no longer of use to you, you disposed of him with less thought than one gives to taking out the trash." Judge Edwards then addressed Riley's behavior during the trial, her voice rising with a righteous anger that was all the more powerful for its rarity. "But your crime, as heinous as it was, is somehow surpassed by the sheer, unadulterated evil you displayed within these very walls," she continued, her eyes boring into Riley. "I sat on this bench and I watched you smirk at the evidence of your own depravity. I listened as you whispered cruel jokes while the mother of the man you murdered wept in agony. And I will go to my grave remembering the sound of your laughter during her testimony, a sound so devoid of humanity, so filled with sadistic glee that it will haunt everyone who heard it." The judge's speech was a systematic dismantling of Riley's entire being, a verbal condemnation that stripped away any claim to victimhood or circumstance. "You speak of wanting a fresh start," Judge Edwards said, her voice laced with contempt. "You murdered for the chance to live a new life of luxury and ease. Well, Mrs. Jones, you will have your fresh start. Your new life will begin today, but it will not be in a chic downtown apartment. Your new home will be a 6-by-9-foot concrete cell in the state's maximum security prison. Your new view will be of steel bars and cinder blocks. Your new companions will be the other predatory, soulless creatures that society has had to lock away to protect the innocent." The judge finally picked up her gavel, her face a mask of grim finality. "You do not deserve mercy, for you have never shown it. You do not deserve leniency, for your actions were calculated and cruel. You deserve only justice, in its swiftest and most absolute form." With that, Judge Edwards delivered the sentence Riley Jones never believed she would receive, the consequence she was too arrogant to ever truly consider. For the murder of Charles Jones, this court sentences you to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. You will leave this courtroom today, and you will spend every remaining day of your natural life in a cage, where you can no longer harm or deceive or prey upon the good and the decent. You are a cancer on the soul of this community, and today you are excised." As the gavel struck the block with a deafening crack, Riley's arrogant mask finally shattered. Her face contorted not with remorse, but with pure, pathetic self-pity, and a raw, animalistic scream of rage tore from her throat as bailiffs moved in to cuff her. Justice had not just been served, it had been unleashed, a righteous fury from the bench that provided a final powerful voice for the victim whose own had been so cruelly silenced.